Derek Whitmore stopped halfway across the town square. For a moment, he honestly wondered if he'd mistaken someone else for her. The woman standing beneath the white canopy at the Community Reading Week stage looked nothing like the 29-year-old who used to spend Saturday mornings helping him alphabetize secondhand novels in a tiny bookstore. She wore a tailored navy blazer over a cream blouse, her honey blonde hair neatly pinned back against the cool spring breeze. Cameras followed every step she took as city officials welcomed her to the microphone. Claire Hale, CEO, national keynote speaker. The woman he hadn't seen in 12 years. Derek lowered the box of children's books in his hands before anyone noticed he had stopped moving. Dad, Noah's voice pulled him back. His 14-year-old son adjusted the stack of paperbacks he was carrying and looked up. You okay? Yeah. You don't sound like yeah. Derek forced a smile. Just thinking. Noah had inherited his mother's ability to notice what people tried to hide. He didn't argue. He simply nudged the box resting in his father's arms. Come on. Mrs. Alvarez wants these at booth 4 before the opening ceremony. They crossed the square together while volunteers tied colorful banners between old maple trees. Families drifted from booth to booth. Children chased one another across the grass, and local musicians tuned their instruments near the fountain. For Derek, the bookstore wasn't simply a business. It was home. After his wife passed away 6 years earlier, Turning Pages, the small neighborhood bookstore and reading cafe he owned, became the place where he rebuilt life one ordinary day at a time. Morning deliveries, regular customers, story hour every Wednesday, homework at the back table while Noah finished school assignments. Predictable, steady, safe. He intended to keep it that way. Before we go any further, I'd love to know a little about you. How old are you? Where are you watching from? And have you ever unexpectedly run into someone who completely changed your day? The opening ceremony began with applause rolling across the square. Claire stepped onto the stage with the confidence of someone used to speaking in front of thousands. Yet Derek noticed something no one else would. Whenever she became nervous, she lightly rubbed her thumb against the edge of her note cards. She was doing it now. Some habits, apparently, survived 12 years. Mr. Whitmore? A volunteer hurried over. The organizers need one more table near the guest reception area. No problem. Derek grabbed the folded table and carried it toward the hospitality tent behind the stage. He had almost finished setting it up when another pair of hands reached for the opposite side. Looks like we had the same idea. The voice was calm, familiar. He looked up. Claire stood only a few feet away. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then both laughed softly, almost out of disbelief. I didn't know your bookstore was part of the event, Claire said. I didn't know you were giving the keynote. I guess we're both full of surprises. Before Derek could answer, a local newspaper photographer walked past, smiling as he adjusted his camera. You two look surprisingly comfortable together. Derek chuckled and instinctively took half a step back. Careful, he said with an awkward grin. People would think we're together. Claire held his gaze. The spring breeze lifted a loose strand of her hair. Instead of laughing it off, she smiled with a quiet warmth he hadn't seen in years. Would that be bad? The sounds of the festival faded into the background. For the first time in 12 years, Derek realized the question he had spent so long avoiding might still be waiting for an answer. Derek barely heard the applause that followed Claire's keynote speech. Her question lingered far longer than the audience's standing ovation. Would that be bad? He had answered hundreds of difficult questions over the years. Customers asked for recommendations. Parents wanted books that could help children through grief. Noah asked honest questions that deserved honest answers. But that one simple sentence left him speechless. By the time the opening ceremony ended, the square had transformed into exactly what Derek loved most about Heartwarming. Children sprawled across picnic blankets listening to volunteer readers. Local authors signed novels beneath white tents. Elderly couples wandered between booths carrying paper cups of coffee, while teenagers browsed comic books and fantasy novels. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. Stories had always done their best work quietly. Dad, Noah appeared beside him with 2 grilled cheese sandwiches wrapped in paper. You forgot lunch again. I was busy. You always say that. I usually mean it. Noah handed him one sandwich before taking a bite from the other. So, Derek knew that tone. So what? The lady from the stage. He tried to sound casual. What about her? You know her. We used to. Noah studied his father's face for a second. You smiled differently. Derek looked away toward the bookstore booth. I don't know what you're talking about. You do. Noah shrugged. You smiled like somebody who remembered something good. Before Derek could answer, Mrs. Alvarez called Noah over to help organize the children's reading contest. The teenager waved before jogging across the square. Derek watched him disappear into the crowd. Kids noticed more than adults ever gave them credit for. The afternoon passed quickly. Business was steady, but Derek found himself distracted by small moments he hadn't expected. Once, he caught Claire kneeling beside a little girl who couldn't decide between two books. Instead of recommending one herself, Claire asked the girl which story made her curious enough to keep turning pages. Another time, Derek watched Claire patiently carry folding chairs with volunteers after one speaker canceled. Nobody asked her to. Nobody even noticed. She simply did it. That surprised him. 12 years ago, Claire had dreamed bigger than anyone he had ever known. She wanted to build educational programs that reached children far beyond one small town. Back then, Derek admired that ambition. He also feared it. Not because she wanted too much. Because he worried one day she would discover that his quiet little bookstore wasn't enough. He had never actually asked her. He had simply convinced himself he already knew the answer. Late that afternoon, a light spring rain drifted across the square, sending visitors beneath tents and awnings. Volunteers rushed to cover stacks of books with plastic sheets. Without thinking, Derek grabbed one side of a large canvas canopy, just as someone else caught the opposite corner. Claire. They secured it together while raindrops drummed softly overhead. You still react before everyone else does, she said. You still notice. A faint smile crossed her face. I remember. The words settled gently between them. Not heavy, not awkward, simply true. For a moment, they watched children laugh as they splashed through shallow puddles despite their parents' protests. They're going to get soaked, Derek said. They're also going to remember today. He nodded. Probably. Claire glanced toward Noah, who was helping younger children carry books inside the library entrance. He's a good kid. He makes it easy most days. And the hard days? Derek smiled. He reminds me I'm still learning. Claire looked down at the rain collecting along the edge of the canopy. I've thought about asking you something for years. He turned toward her. What stopped you? I wasn't sure I deserved the answer. Before he could respond, one of the event organizers hurried over. Claire, the mayor needs you backstage. She nodded politely. I'll be right there. The organizer disappeared again. Claire looked back at Derek. We're meeting tomorrow morning to plan the children's literacy program. I saw the schedule. She hesitated. I'd rather not pretend we're strangers. We aren't. No. A gentle sadness touched her eyes. We're something else. She walked toward the stage before either of them said another word. Derek remained beneath the canopy long after the rain had stopped. For 12 years, he had believed the hardest part of losing Claire was watching her leave. Standing there, he began to wonder if the harder truth was that neither of them had ever really understood why they had said goodbye in the first place. The planning meeting started at 9 o'clock the next morning inside Riverton's public library. Unlike the festival outside, the conference room was quiet except for the occasional turning of notebook pages and the low hum of the old heating system. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, landing across a long oak table covered with calendars, children's book catalogs, and sketches for reading stations. Derek arrived 5 minutes early. He always did. Not because he was obsessed with punctuality, but because arriving early gave him time to settle into a room before everyone else filled it with conversation. Claire walked in exactly on time. She carried a leather notebook instead of a laptop, something Derek immediately noticed. You still prefer writing things down, he said before thinking. She looked at the notebook in her hand and smiled. You remembered. I remember a lot. The words escaped more honestly than he intended. Neither of them tried to explain them. Soon the room filled with librarians, teachers, volunteers, and city organizers discussing ideas for the Children's Literacy Initiative. The goal was simple: create reading spaces throughout Riverton that children could enjoy long after Community Reading Week ended. Ideas bounced around the table. Outdoor storytelling, weekend family reading hours, book donation drives, mobile library visits. When disagreements appeared, Derek listened before speaking. Claire noticed he hadn't changed in one important way. He still waited until everyone else finished before offering an opinion. When he finally did, the room became quieter. What if? Derek began, sliding a rough sketch toward the group. Instead of asking children to come to books, we bring stories into places they already love. He pointed to parks, playgrounds, the community garden. We create reading corners where families already spend time together. Several teachers nodded immediately. Claire looked at the drawing, then back at Derek. I like that. She didn't add to it. She didn't improve it. She simply let the idea belong to him. Years ago, she probably would have built on it before anyone else could. Today she only asked thoughtful questions. By lunchtime, the group had divided into smaller teams. Claire found herself carrying folders toward the library cafe, just as Derek reached for the same stack. We're doing this again, she said. It seems to happen a lot. They shared a quiet laugh. The cafe was nearly empty. They sat across from each other with sandwiches and coffee, separated by little more than a notebook and 12 years that suddenly didn't feel quite as long. Claire glanced around before lowering her voice. I stopped drinking coffee for almost 3 years. Derek blinked. You did? It reminded me of this place. He looked at his cup. You always ordered vanilla lattes. And you always stole one sip. You never minded. I never said I minded. For a second, they weren't talking like strangers rebuilding polite conversation. They were talking like two people who still carried pieces of each other's ordinary life. The moment lasted until Derek's phone vibrated. He smiled as soon as he saw Noah's name. Everything okay? Claire asked. It's Noah. He answered. Hey, buddy. Dad, I forgot my history project. I can bring it. You don't have to leave the meeting. I'll make time. It's okay. Mr. Collins said I can turn it in tomorrow. You worked too hard on it to wait. Noah sighed. I knew you'd say that. I'll see you in 20 minutes. After hanging up, Derek immediately stood. I've got to run. Claire smiled softly. You always put family first. He shrugged as if it were obvious. I only get one chance to be his dad. He gathered his papers, but before leaving, he hesitated. You know? Claire looked up. I used to think you chose your career over everything else. The smile slowly faded from her face. And I used to think you believed your dreams only had room for one person. Neither defended themselves. Neither argued. The silence carried more honesty than any debate could have. Finally, Derek gave a small nod. I should get going. Claire watched him leave the cafe, hurrying toward the parking lot without another word. She sat there for several minutes after he disappeared. It struck her how strange memory could be. They still knew each other's favorite drinks, still finished each other's thoughts, still recognized tiny habits no one else noticed. Yet somewhere along the way, they had stopped believing they knew each other's hearts. And perhaps that had always been the real distance between them. 3 days later, the final event of Community Reading Week brought volunteers together inside Derek's bookstore after closing time. The front windows reflected the soft glow of streetlights while folding tables disappeared beneath stacks of donated books, waiting to be delivered to schools the following week. Most of the volunteers had already gone home. Only Derek and Claire remained, sorting the last few boxes in comfortable silence. Claire picked up a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird and smiled. You still keep this edition. You gave it to me. I wasn't sure. You wrote your name inside the cover. She opened the first page. There it was, in blue ink. For Derek. Never stop believing stories can change people. She traced the faded handwriting with her fingertips. I almost forgot I wrote that. I didn't. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, rain tapped gently against the bookstore windows. Claire carefully placed the novel back on the shelf before noticing another book resting nearby. Its spine was cracked from years of use. A small train ticket slipped from between the pages and drifted onto the wooden floor. She froze. Derek bent down to pick it up. What is it? Claire stared at the faded ticket. I bought this the week after I moved to Chicago. He looked at it, confused. It was for a Friday night. She nodded slowly. I planned to come back. Derek frowned. You never told me. I wanted it to be a surprise. She let out a quiet breath. I thought, if I showed up instead of calling, we'd finally figure everything out. He turned the ticket over in his hands. The date caught his attention. It was 1 week after the day they had said goodbye. I waited for you that Friday, Derek said softly. Claire looked up immediately. What? I closed the bookstore early. You did. I stayed at the old train station for almost 3 hours. Her expression changed from confusion to disbelief. I wasn't there. I know. Silence filled the bookstore. Neither accusation nor anger entered the room. Only bewilderment. Claire shook her head. I bought the ticket. She paused. But I never got on the train. What happened? She looked toward the rain-covered window. My father came to my apartment that morning. Derek listened without interrupting. He told me you deserved someone whose life wasn't always leaving town. She swallowed hard. He said if I truly loved you, I'd let you build the quiet life you always wanted. Derek remained perfectly still. I believed he was protecting both of us. Another silence followed. Then Derek spoke almost to himself. My mother told me not to wait anymore. Claire slowly turned back toward him. She said your career would always come first. Neither statement sounded cruel anymore. Only painfully human. Two parents. Two people who thought they were preventing heartbreak. Instead, they had helped create 12 years of it. Derek folded the train ticket carefully and placed it back inside the book. For the first time since Claire had returned to Riverton, they weren't arguing over what happened. They were staring at the same missing piece, realizing the story each of them had carried for years had never been complete. And for the first time, neither of them was certain who they would have become if that train had actually arrived. The bookstore stayed unusually quiet after community reading week ended. For the first time in days, there were no volunteers carrying boxes, no children racing toward the reading corner, and no reporters asking Claire for interviews. Only the familiar sound of pages turning and the soft chime above the front door whenever a customer stepped inside. Derek tried to lose himself in ordinary work. He unpacked new arrivals, straightened crooked shelves, repaired the loose leg on a reading table Noah had accidentally bumped into weeks earlier. None of it stopped him from replaying the conversation about the train ticket. The story he had believed for 12 years no longer fit the facts. Late that afternoon, Noah wandered downstairs from the apartment above the bookstore carrying an old cardboard box covered in dust. I found this in Grandma's closet. Derek looked up. I thought we cleaned everything out. I guess we missed one. They placed the box on the counter. Inside were old family photographs, holiday cards, receipts from years ago, and several unopened envelopes tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Derek's expression slowly changed. Every envelope carried the same handwriting. Claire's. His hands became strangely still. I've never seen these. Noah looked from the envelopes to his father's face. You want me to leave? Derek managed a small nod. I'll be upstairs. The teenager quietly disappeared without another question. For several minutes, Derek simply stared at the letters. The earliest was dated only 2 weeks after Claire moved away. The latest nearly 8 months later. Every one of them had been opened once, then carefully sealed again. He unfolded the first letter. Claire had written about her tiny apartment in Chicago. She admitted she was terrified. She missed Riverton. She missed the bookstore. She even described walking past coffee shops because their smell reminded her too much of Saturday mornings with him. Near the end, one sentence caught his breath. Please don't mistake distance for the end of us. I'm trying to find a way for both our dreams to survive. Derek closed his eyes. He had never read those words before. The second letter spoke about an interview. The third included photographs of neighborhoods she hoped they could one day explore together. The fourth apologized for not coming back after buying the train ticket. She wrote that her father insisted Derek deserved a life untouched by constant uncertainty. Every letter carried hope. None sounded like someone choosing to walk away. That evening, Derek drove across town with the entire bundle resting on the passenger seat beside him. Claire answered the door herself. She looked surprised. Derek, he held out the ribbon-bound letters. I think these belong to both of us. Her smile faded as soon as she recognized the handwriting. I sent those. I know. You got them? No. He shook his head. I got them today. Claire invited him inside without another word. Her home was elegant, but surprisingly personal. Bookshelves lined one wall. Family photographs filled another. Nothing about it felt like the cold executive office people probably imagined. They sat across from each other in the living room while the letters rested untouched between them. My mother kept them, Derek said quietly. Claire lowered her eyes. I don't think she meant to be cruel. I don't either. I think she believed she was protecting me. He nodded. So did your father. Neither of them blamed people who were no longer there to explain themselves. Love, they realized, could sometimes make people interfere in ways they believed were merciful. Claire picked up the oldest letter. I spent years wondering why you never answered. I spent years believing there was nothing left to answer. She laughed once through watery eyes. That's almost unbelievable. It would have sounded unbelievable to me last week. Another silence settled over the room. This one felt different. Not empty. Not painful. Simply honest. Finally, Claire looked at him. So what do we do with 12 years that never should have happened? Derek leaned back slowly. We can't get them back. No. But we don't have to keep living inside the version of the story that wasn't true. Claire studied him carefully. You really believe that? He thought about Noah. About the bookstore. About the letters now resting on her coffee table. I think I've spent enough years letting assumptions make decisions for me. Claire smiled softly. So have I. Neither of them reached across the table. Neither tried to erase the years between them with a single conversation. Instead, they opened the first letter together. Not to mourn what had been lost, but to understand the people they had once been before deciding who they wanted to become now. The next few weeks settled into something neither Derek nor Claire tried to define. They didn't call it starting over. They didn't pretend 12 missing years could disappear because a box of forgotten letters had finally been opened. Instead, they chose something much simpler. They stopped assuming. Every Tuesday afternoon, Claire found an excuse to stop by turning pages before driving back to the city. Sometimes she picked up a novel she didn't really need. Sometimes she helped shelve children's books after school let out. Other days, she simply sat in the corner with a cup of tea while Derek finished helping customers. There was no performance. No one was trying to impress the other anymore. One rainy evening, Noah walked downstairs from the apartment carrying his backpack. Claire was kneeling beside a group of second graders, helping them choose books for a reading challenge. When the children left, Noah leaned against one of the shelves. So, Claire smiled. I've noticed that's how conversations with your dad usually begin. He laughed. I guess I learned it from him. She closed the last picture book and placed it neatly on the display table. You've got something on your mind. I do. He hesitated for a moment. Can I ask you something? Of course. Were you really the person Dad almost married? Claire didn't answer immediately. She looked toward the checkout counter where Derek was ringing up a customer, completely unaware of the conversation. We thought we might be, she said honestly. What happened? We stopped asking each other questions. Noah frowned. That's all. It sounds small. It does. It wasn't. She smiled sadly. When people stop asking, they usually start guessing. The teenager thought about that longer than she expected. My dad guesses a lot. So do I. He nodded slowly. Maybe that's why you're talking now. Claire looked at him with quiet surprise. You might be right. Later that evening, after the bookstore closed, Derek locked the front door while Claire helped wipe down the cafe tables. You don't have to keep helping, he said. I know. You've got a company to run. And you've got shelves to organize. He smiled. Fair point. They worked in comfortable silence until Derek finally spoke. I owe you an apology. Claire looked up. For what? I spent years telling myself you chose success because it was easier than believing I never gave you the chance to explain. She rested the cleaning cloth on the table. I owe you one too. You don't. I do. She stepped a little closer. I let my father convince me that loving someone sometimes meant deciding what was best for them without asking. Derek nodded slowly. We were both listening to everyone except each other. Neither sentence sounded bitter. Anymore. Just true. A few days later, Claire invited Derek to visit the headquarters of Hale Learning Systems. He almost declined. Corporate offices had never been his world. Glass walls. Executive boardrooms. Reception desks larger than his bookstore. But curiosity won. Claire met him in the lobby without assistants or photographers. She gave him a simple visitor badge and smiled. I wanted you to see where I spend most of my days. He looked around. I imagined something colder. So did I once. As they walked through the building, employees greeted Claire by her first name. She stopped to ask about a receptionist's sick daughter. She congratulated an intern on finishing graduate school. She thanked the maintenance supervisor for staying late during a recent storm. Derek watched quietly. This wasn't the woman he had imagined all those years. Not the ambitious executive who cared more about titles than people. She had become a leader. But she had never stopped being the woman who remembered names, noticed small details, and believed stories could change lives. When they reached the rooftop terrace overlooking the city, Derek rested his hands on the railing. I've spent 12 years remembering who you used to be. Claire stood beside him. And he looked at her, the evening sunlight catching the breeze in her hair. I forgot to ask who you'd become. Claire's eyes softened. I've been wondering the same thing about you. For the first time since finding the letters, neither of them was trying to repair the past. They were discovering the present. And somehow, That felt even more important. By early May, life had settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and completely new. Claire still spent most weekdays leading Hale learning systems. Derek still opened turning pages every morning at 8. Noah still claimed he was too old to help with children's story hour. Yet somehow he was always there every Wednesday, stacking chairs or recommending graphic novels to younger readers. Nothing had officially changed, yet everything had. People around town had started noticing. Mrs. Alvarez smiled every time Claire walked into the bookstore. The mail carrier no longer looked surprised to see her car parked outside. Even the regular customers stopped asking who she was. They simply greeted her by name. One Friday afternoon, Derek was organizing a display near the front window when Claire stepped inside carrying a slim folder instead of her usual canvas book bag. Her smile was gentle, but something about her eyes told him she had rehearsed this conversation. "You've got news," he said. "I do." "Good. I think so." He locked the cash register before motioning toward the reading corner. They sat in the oversized armchairs where parents usually read with their children. Claire rested the folder on her lap without opening it. "This morning the board offered me a new position." Derek listened quietly. "They want me to become executive chair." He smiled. "Congratulations." She didn't smile back. "It comes with one condition." His expression softened. "You'd have to move." She nodded. "Seattle." The word lingered between them, not because of the distance, because both of them immediately remembered another city, another conversation, another goodbye. Claire took a slow breath. 12 years ago. She paused. "I would have accepted before telling you." "I know. This time I wanted you to hear it before anyone else." Derek looked down at the folder. "What do you want?" She answered without hesitation. "I want the job." Then she looked directly into his eyes. "And I don't want to lose you." Neither sentence canceled the other. For Derek, that mattered. He leaned back slowly. "A few years ago, I would have heard those two things as opposites. And now I think they're just two truths that deserve the same respect." Claire blinked, surprised. "You aren't angry?" "No." "You aren't asking me to stay?" He smiled faintly. "If I ask you to become someone smaller just to make me feel safe." He shook his head. "Then we haven't learned anything." Claire laughed softly, though her eyes glistened. "You always know how to make the difficult answer sound simple." "It isn't simple." He looked toward the bookstore shelves. "It's just honest." That evening, Derek drove home unusually quiet. After dinner, Noah found him sitting alone on the back porch watching the last light disappear behind the trees. "You've got your thinking face," Noah said. "I do. Yeah. The one where you stare at absolutely nothing." Derek laughed. "I've been offered a decision." Noah sat beside him. "About Claire?" He nodded. "She might move." Noah was silent for a moment. "Are you scared?" "Yes." "Because you'll lose her?" Derek thought carefully before answering. "No." "Then why?" "I'm afraid I'll stop saying what I really want because I don't want to make her life harder." Noah smiled. "You know what Mom used to tell me?" Derek looked at him. "She said loving someone doesn't mean making every decision easier." He waited. "It means making every decision together." The words settled quietly over the porch. The next afternoon, Claire returned to the bookstore. This time Derek already had 2 cups of tea waiting. "I've been thinking," he said. "So have I." "No more guessing." She nodded immediately. "No more deciding what's best for the other person. No more disappearing. No more silence." Claire reached into the folder and slid a calendar across the table. "I haven't answered the board yet." Derek looked at it. The page wasn't filled with business meetings. It was blank. Waiting. For the first time in their lives, neither of them was asking the other to choose between love and purpose. They were preparing to choose the future together, one honest conversation at a time. The following Monday, Claire walked into the bookstore carrying the same blank calendar they had looked at 2 days earlier. Only now, several dates had been filled in. Not with flights. Not with board meetings. With questions. Derek smiled as he read them. How often should we see each other? What matters most to Noah during the school year? What are we unwilling to sacrifice? He looked up. You turned our future into a meeting agenda. Claire laughed. I turned it into a conversation. I like yours better. She sat across from him at the small cafe table near the window where spring sunlight poured through shelves lined with well-worn novels. 12 years ago, she said, I believed every important decision had one correct answer. And now, I think most important decisions have honest trade-offs. Derek nodded. I've learned that too. For the next 2 hours, neither of them tried to persuade the other. Instead, they asked questions neither had known how to ask when they were younger. "If Seattle happens," Derek asked, "what does your week actually look like?" Claire pulled out her notebook. "The board expects me there 3 days a week. And the rest? I can work remotely." "You negotiated that already?" "I told them I wouldn't accept until I knew what kind of life I wanted outside the office." He smiled. "That sounds like someone very different from the woman I used to know." "It is." She paused. "I hope that's a good thing." "It is." Later that afternoon, they picked Noah up after school. As the three of them walked through Riverton's downtown streets, Noah quietly listened while Derek and Claire talked about schedules, flights, school breaks, and ordinary weekends. It didn't sound romantic. It sounded real. That evening, Claire joined them for dinner above the bookstore. Homemade chicken soup. Fresh bread from the bakery across the street. Nothing fancy. Halfway through the meal, Noah looked from one adult to the other. "So," Claire smiled. "Apparently everyone in this family starts difficult conversations the same way." He grinned. "I've got a question." "Go ahead." "If you move, are we pretending nothing changes?" Claire answered first. "No." Derek added quietly. "Everything changes." Noah nodded. "Good." They both looked at him. "I'd be worried if you acted like it wasn't hard." The room fell silent. Finally, Noah shrugged. "I don't need perfect." He smiled at both of them. "I just need honest." After dinner, Derek walked Claire to her car. The evening air carried the scent of fresh rain and blooming dogwood trees. Claire leaned against the driver's door. "I spoke with the board this morning. And I accepted." Derek held her eyes. "I figured you would. They also accepted my proposal." "What proposal?" "I'll spend Monday through Wednesday in Seattle." She smiled. "Thursday through Sunday belong wherever life matters most." He stared at her for a second. "You negotiated." "Your own schedule." "I negotiated our chance." The words stayed with him. Not because they were dramatic. Because they were practical. Built from compromise instead of sacrifice. A week later, Derek flew to Seattle for the first time. Not to convince Claire to come home. Not to inspect her new life. Simply to understand it. She met him outside the headquarters after work. No executive dinner. No luxury event. Instead, they walked through a neighborhood farmer's market, bought coffee from a corner cafe, and spent an hour sitting on a waterfront bench watching ferries cross Elliott Bay. "You know what's strange?" Claire asked. "What?" "I spent years believing success meant never slowing down. And now, I don't remember the last board meeting." She looked toward the water. "But I'll remember today." Derek smiled. "I used to think choosing someone meant giving up part of yourself." He glanced toward the skyline. "I was wrong." Claire turned toward him. "What changed your mind?" "You did." He shook his head gently. "No. You didn't ask me to become smaller. You asked me to become part of the decision." As the evening sun reflected across the bay, neither of them spoke for several minutes. There was no promise that distance would always be easy. No guarantee that work, parenting, and two different cities would never create new challenges. But for the first time in either of their lives, every difficult decision belonged to both of them. Not because one person followed the other. Because they had finally learned that love wasn't measured by who sacrificed more. It was measured by who stayed at the table long enough to build a future together. 6 months later, Derek stood outside turning pages just before sunrise, unlocking the front door the way he had done thousands of times before. Some things had never changed. The familiar scent of books. The old wooden floor that creaked near the history section. The little bell above the entrance. Those ordinary details still grounded him. What had changed was what waited beyond them. A framed photograph now rested near the checkout counter. It showed 3 smiling faces at Seattle's waterfront during Noah's fall break. No expensive gifts. No glamorous celebration. Just a weekend together. Claire never moved back to Riverton full-time. Derek never left his bookstore behind. Instead, they built a life that respected both realities. Every Thursday evening, Claire flew back to Riverton. Every Monday morning, she returned to Seattle. Some weekends Derek and Noah visited her. Some weekends she came home to them. The schedule wasn't always easy. Flights were delayed. Meetings ran long. School projects appeared without warning. Life remained wonderfully imperfect. One Saturday afternoon, the bookstore buzzed with families attending another children's reading event. Noah, now more confident than ever, stood in front of a group of younger kids reading Charlotte's Web with surprising enthusiasm. Derek watched proudly from the back of the room. Claire quietly slipped beside him. I think he's getting better than both of us. Derek smiled. I think he already is. When the reading session ended, parents gathered their children while conversations filled the store with warmth and laughter. As Derek carried a stack of returned books toward the shelves, an elderly customer smiled knowingly. I've been meaning to ask you something. Derek laughed. That usually means I'm about to answer a dangerous question. The woman pointed gently toward Claire, who was helping a little boy zip his backpack. People still think you two are together. Derek looked across the room. Months earlier, that sentence would have made him uncomfortable. Years earlier, it would have reminded him of everything he thought he had lost. Today, it simply made him smile. He walked toward Claire. She looked up as he approached. What? He shook his head. I was just thinking. About the first day we saw each other again. She laughed softly. You mean when you warned everyone not to think we were together? I do. And now? He reached for a stack of books she was carrying. Now I think I spent too many years worrying about what people might assume. Claire smiled. What changed? I stopped letting fear answer questions before life had the chance. She looked at him for a quiet moment. So, he laughed. You've started every important conversation with that word. I probably always will. So. She slipped her hand gently into his. Would that still be bad? Derek looked around the bookstore. At Noah, laughing with the younger children. At neighbors chatting over coffee. At shelves filled with stories that had outlived generations. Then he looked back at Claire. No. His answer was simple. Certain. And I don't plan on letting go this time. No applause followed. No dramatic announcement. No audience stopped to cheer. Life simply continued around them. Some endings don't arrive with fireworks. They arrive with peace. Looking back at their story as an outside observer, I don't think it was ever really about a CEO falling in love with a single father. It wasn't about success defeating simplicity. It wasn't about choosing career over family or family over ambition. It was about two ordinary human beings who finally learned that assumptions are poor substitutes for honest conversations. It is also a reminder of something our society sometimes forgets. A person's worth is never measured by a paycheck, a job title, a neighborhood, or the size of a bank account. Whether someone is wealthy or struggling financially, every person deserves respect, kindness, and the chance to be loved without prejudice. Looking down on someone because they have less money does not make anyone greater. Real character is revealed by humility, compassion, integrity, and the way we treat people who cannot offer us status or advantage. In the end, Derek's bookstore and Claire's executive office were simply two different places where meaningful work happened. Neither made one life more valuable than the other. What gave their story meaning was not where they worked, but the choices they made when they finally listened instead of assuming, spoke instead of guessing, and loved each other as equals. And perhaps that is the happiest ending any story can truly earn.